All right. So today we get to put all the pieces together and we are going to see how to set up project structure for a full stack application, which has a front end and a back end, as you guys can see over here. And set up authentication, right? We've learned how to create sign in, sign up, log in, log out endpoints in Django. We're going to see how to now connect our front end and our back end. And along the way, we'll learn about the joys of cross-origin resource sharing, which is a security feature that browsers and the sort of client-server architecture implements that we'll have to deal with. We'll see how to configure Django for it. We'll connect our front end to our back end. We'll level up a bit with Axios and see how we can bake in some of the common things we'll need. And then we'll see the front end code for signing up, logging in, logging out, saving the auth token that Django will create when we log in, and also some of the intricacies of our front end application user flow, where things like page refreshes and so on can get surprisingly tricky in terms of how you manage the user interface now that you have like different things you want to display depending on if a user is logged in or logged out. Do folks have any questions before we dive on in? Okay, cool. Let's take a look at this project. We have this put together already. So first, as you'll note, I now have two directories here, front end and back end. The front end, as you can guess, has our React app. The back end has our Django app. Often in a real world environment, these might be two separate repos. We really have two projects in one repo right now, right? And when you have multiple projects in one repo, that's often called a mono repo. Like as in mono is in one big repo. And you'll sometimes see companies do that. It's less common. For us, this is easier when we teach deploying to AWS. And frankly, it's a bit easier to get started. We do recommend using this project layout for your personal project of just putting it all in one repo. The backend project is a to-do list app. If I poke around here, we see we've got our Django database. And just as my own sanity check real quick, I am going to log into pSQL and connect to it and make sure that my migrations and everything were run and we're looking good to go. And we see that there's to-do lists. We see that there's tasks, and all of these are things we've built before. There's subtasks. And then what's most relevant for us is there are users. And specifically, a user can sign up, log in, log out, and just to kind of like walk through a bit of this code to refresh ourselves. We have this app user class, and can someone remind me what this abstract user class is here and why we use it, why we inherit from it?
It's got a lot of the common user functionality that we want to use.
Yeah.
At least that's why I would use it.
Do I have to use it in Django?
If you want to maintain your sanity.
That's a great answer. I would say that that's bang on. We can get away without using the abstract user class in Django, but really all of Django's authentication hooks into it, so we kind of need it. Um, and then we have an email, we have a display name, and we have the all-important username field over here, right? Django requires the idea of a username. And we can use the email field for username, but we have to tell Django that we're doing that. Um, and then I think somewhere in here. Can someone remind me, do we have to make a change in settings PY for the app user?
Yes.
Yeah,
Down at yes, there you go.
there it is. Right.
Because
And
by
then this,
default, it wants to use some default user, right? And we're overriding.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. I knew it was there and I was looking for it. And we have to tell Django, hey, this is the model I want you to use for authentication. So like you guys were saying, if we want to maintain our sanity, we should really use Django, the Django way. And that means inheriting from abstract user. Um, and then if we take a look at our endpoints for logging in, because this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, we see we've got an endpoint for sign up, for login and logout. And let's just quickly look over that view code to sort of warm up our brains. And we see to sign up, it's a post request. We're getting data. We're getting a username that could be coming from email field. We're creating a new user, right? We then use the set password method that Django gives us from that abstract user class. We then use the token class in Django to create an authentication token for this user. And we then return the token in a response. Login, the user has to pass in their username and their password. We then use Django's login function, and that will check if the password is correct with the hashed password that we have saved in the database. If it is correct, and if the user is valid, we will create an auth token, and then we will return it in the response. We have here our class to enforce authentication on logged in endpoints, right? So this is inheriting from Django REST Framework's API view. But we're saying that any view class that has this token request class has to have an authentication token. And we're setting that right here. And then we can use this wherever we want. I would use this for lists and to-dos, right? So that I have to be logged in and I can only create a to-do on my to-do list and not another user's. And we see here you have to be logged in to be logged out, and you have to be logged in to get some information. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions or stuff that it might be good to review before we kind of keep on rolling. We'll take a look at the front end and then we'll start building stuff out. Cool. Okay, so our front end code, and again, I pulled this from a repo that's linked to in the curriculum for a to-do app. Has a lot of things we're used to. And let me navigate in here real quick. And I think I installed our NPM dependencies, but if not, let's go ahead and do that. And if we just sort of start at the top here, we see there's not a lot. We have a nav bar. We see we've got React Router outlet. If I look at my routing, I see there's a home page, a sign up page, a login page. If I look at my sign up and login page, they're pretty empty, right? We're going to fill these in. I'm going to fill in my home page as well. If I look at my nav bar, we see that we're using Bootstrap, right? We've got a Bootstrap nav bar, but that's about it. And let me go ahead, in fact, and spin this up. And in fact, let's do a little tiling here. And let me just have my browser always show the toolbar so I can see the URLs. And we see that we've got our React app. And it's nothing fancy, right? It doesn't do much yet, but it works. And that's the important thing. And let me open up one more tab here. So I have a command line, I have my server, and then I have pSQL. And this is pretty common when you're doing full stack dev. You're probably going to have, I would recommend a setup like this where you've just got pSQL open so you can use it. You've got your front end server running. Soon you'd actually have Django running, and then you'd have yet another shell session where you can do some command line stuff. So let's write a little bit of JavaScript code and let's do this sort of hello world of connecting our front end to our back end. As we do this, we're going to run into some problems that are common to full stack applications, and we're going to talk about how to solve them. So let me go ahead and just go to app.jsx. And all I want to do here is a hello world to talk to the back end from the front end. And actually, to do that, it sure would help if my Python server was running. So let's run our Django server. Let me open up yet another terminal here. Let me also do a sanity check. So this is good. This is exactly what I want to see. Right now, this is just proof that my application works. I think we have, do we have a test endpoint? Let's see if we have one written in Django, and if not, we might write one real quick. Yeah, let's write a test endpoint really quick. Let's see if I can do this without getting too lost in the sauce. We'll call this just test endpoint. We'll inherit from API view. It's going to be a GET request. And that's really all I wanted to do. And then over here in URLs py, let's see, does info do what I want? I think info gives us information on the logged in user. Yeah, so info is slightly different. So this should be API slash users slash test. It takes one positional argument
Your
that we're given.
your view needs, I think, request.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
Or excuse me, your get request inside the view.
Yep. Even though we're not using it, I need the request. And Carlos, were you gonna say the same thing?
Yeah, I just realized that I was talking for a minute without unmuting myself. Yep, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yep, and that's when I'm seeing the error messages as well. And there we go. I got a hello world test endpoint working. Got my brain warmed up a bit here. And this is always good, right? I'm kicking the tires. So now let's build this out in app.jsx. And we're going to keep it pretty simple. Let's go ahead. Let's install Axios if it's not. So let me open up my front end app. Let me stop it real quick. Spin it up again. And let's go ahead and let's import Axios. And I think that import's correct. I don't think it's a named import. If we run into errors in a minute, we'll know why. Let's just make a really simple test connection function.
You you misspelled async.
Oh, thank you so much. And now let's use a use effect to fire this. And I should be able to see hello world if I go over here to my console. But in fact, we see something else.
Did
Keep that endpoint you gave it.
Yeah, that's the base endpoint. I think you need to
Oh,
send it
yeah.
to API/users/ whatever it was.
Thank you. I think it was API/users/test. Let's see here. API/users/test. So let's do a hard refresh to have the request happen again. And we see we still have a problem. And in fact, if I go to the network tab here, what's up?
Hot mic, sorry.
No, you're good. So this is actually the error that we want to see now. This error message access XML HTTP request at our endpoint from origin. And origin is a fancy word for essentially the name of the server, the port, the host name, sorry, the protocol, the host name, and the port has been blocked by Core's access policy. No access control allow origin header is present. And in fact, if we look at the network tab here and we search for our test endpoints, we actually see that there are two requests happening, which is kind of interesting. Although it looks like they're both 301s. And we'll talk about why there's two of these in a sec. Let's talk about cores. This is probably one of the more confusing things about sort of the client server architecture and full stack apps. To be totally honest with you guys, I always have to like reread the definition of this and refresh myself. I actually think the MDN docs do a really good job of explaining this. And so could I actually just get a volunteer to read this whole paragraph right here?
I'll do it.
Go for it. Thank you, Justin.
Cross-origin resource sharing, CORS, is an HTTP header-based mechanism that allows a server to indicate any origins other than its own from which a browser should permit loading resources. CORS also relies on a mechanism by which browsers make a pre-flight request to the server hosting the cross-origin resource in order to check that the server will permit the actual request. In that pre-flight, the browser sends headers that indicate the HTTP method and headers that will be used in the actual request.
Yeah, and actually, Justin, can you just keep on reading? Um, and just go ahead and read these two paragraphs here as well, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
An example of a cross-origin request, the front-end JavaScript code served from HTTPS domain tat.a.com uses fetch to make a request from the other one, which is a JSON.
Yep. Yep.
For security reasons, browsers restrict cross-origin HTTP requests initiated from scripts. For example, fetch and XML HTTP requests follow the same origin policy. This means that a web application using those APIs can only request resources from the same origin the application was loaded from, unless a response from other origins it includes the right CORS headers.
Awesome. Justin, thank you. I know that was a mouthful. And I know that was a bit verbose, but I think they do a really good job of breaking this down. Um,
Oh, essentially, it's a whitelist, right? Just for approved origins.
yeah, exactly. And what is an origin?
A domain from which a request is made.
Yep. And to get even more persnickety, um, an origin is the combination of the HTTP protocol, the domain, and the port. Because if you think about it, my V server is running on HTTP localhost, and my Django server is running on HTTP localhost. So same protocol, HTTP, same host name or domain, different ports. And so that's what's triggering cores here.
So it's just the I guess the domain plus the socket. Would that be correct? The correct term
Uh,
for it?
protocol, socket.
Because I
Frankly, I'd
think
have to dredge my
protocol.
memory a bit more. Socket's a Unix way of describing.
Oh, I think in networking terms, I think a socket is a protocol paired with a port, but I could be wrong.
Oh,
It might be an IP paired with a port. Never mind. I'm sorry for confusing things.
no, it's all good. To be honest, I'm a bit rusty there, so you very well could be right. Um, for our purposes, I think, yeah, I don't tend to think about sockets with like HTTP requests and stuff. I think thinking about for most of the time, we really only care about the host name and the port, right? We don't have to worry about the protocol. Like we're not doing a lot of FTP requests. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about HTTP versus HTTPS, but we can usually take the protocol for granted. For us, it's really this combination of host name and port that's important. Um, and like you said, it's basically a whitelist. And the situation here is I have not Django application layers, but I've got my browser. And let's make our browser taller. And then I've got the V dev server. And when I go to the homepage of my front end app, our browser makes a GET request to the V dev server. And let's make this a little smaller. Right, and the V dev server sends back index.html. The browser reads that HTML file, right? And when it hits script tags or other tags requesting resources, most critically, our main JavaScript file. This isn't exactly what's happening, but it's close enough. Right? We want to get our React app. And the vdev server goes ahead and it sends back our React app. In fact, it sends back all the JavaScript files, but this file is sort of what's called the entry point. Really, it's all bundled up into one. And now at this point, I've got my JavaScript running. right? Up until now, we really had browser rendering, index.html, and fetching resources. Once that JavaScript starts to run, we now have our React app running. And now our React app is going to start talking to our Django server. And this is, I've heard this called a Webflow diagram. There's a bunch of tools for making these. This is a really, I strongly recommend making lots of diagrams in this style. It's really useful. And it's like drawing out to understand like authentication flows is a really common use case for it. So now in the browser, our JavaScript code, and I'll make this, let's make this red to indicate that it's happening from JavaScript, since the browser does care about that relative to cores. Right, and in fact, I'll just do axios.get to help to remind us of that. You know, and it's like 8,000 API/users/test. And let's just maybe move that over there. And we'll move that over there. Right, and this is where we hit the cross-origin resource sharing issue and that error that we saw. So first I want to pause and check in and see if folks have like any questions about this Webflow diagram, and if this makes sense in terms of like modeling our client server architecture and how these two applications are interacting. Because we really have three things here happening, right? We have the Vite dev server, then we have our React app running in the browser, and then we have the Django server. So I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions or stuff that you're curious about. Cool. Andy, yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned that the course issue happens when we start getting into the bottom portion.
Mhm.
So essentially we should be prepared, and the easy fix is to import the course. Is that the fix for it? Or is there more stuff to this that we're not aware of?
No, the fix is going to be pretty easy. There's a library for Django called Django Cores we're going to install. We then also in settings PY have to tell Django what URLs to allow requests from. Like we specifically have to tell Django, hey, I want you to allow requests from this server. So the fix is relatively easy, but I think the tricky bit for me is always keeping track of what's causing it. And in fact, it's sort of the server and the browser working together. Because if we go back to our HTTP request and we look at the response,
Yeah, the main reason I'm asking is because I remember we imported cores at some point, and we're told just do it and then it's gonna work. And so if that's related to the other cores, it makes sense.
yeah, no, this is definitely related to that. I just want to dig a bit deeper into it because, like, I don't know how common this is on interview questions, but it's certainly one that could come up. And it's like one of the sort of fundamentals of web browser security. Um, so I want us to get a bit of a stronger understanding of what's happening with the HTTP requests and a little bit more of like how Chorus is working. but you're absolutely correct. Like the fix is relatively straightforward. And does everyone feel pretty good about why we're running into cores and see like with the two origins that we have here? Awesome, right? And what we'll also see is when we deploy to AWS, we set up different rules. Like when you're setting up your server for a production environment, you might be stricter with the cores rules than you would for development. So if I look at this GET request that went to this test endpoint, we see there's a lot of information in the HTTP headers here, right? The browser is in fact saying what kind of data it can accept, what format the data's in, the encodings, the languages, there's caching information, the host that it's sending it to, and we see this header here, origin. So the browser will always include the origin in an HTTP request. And the origin is the domain and the port that the thing initiating the request came from, right? And our JavaScript file came from our dev server running on localhost 5173. So the browser adds that to the request. And there's no way to not have the browser do that. And then there's all this other information like what kind of browser it is, what kind of computer is running, and so on. If we look at the response headers, this move permanently one is a little interesting. But here we see this header referrer policy, same origin, and this cross origin opener policy, same origin, right? So the server is sending back to the browser what origins it will allow requests from. And I believe this is where I always get a little confused, to be honest. In the description here, it was mentioned briefly. When we make an HTTP request to a server, the browser actually makes two requests. It makes a pre-flight request to check that the server will permit the actual request. And then the server sends back saying, hey, here's the origins I'll request things from, or I'll allow, requests to come from. And then the browser enforces that rule. So this is the browser and server working together, right? The server sets the rules in those response headers, but then the browser enforces them. Right? The server sets the rules of what origins are allowed, and then the browser enforces them. So I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions before we keep rolling. Okay, cool. I do recommend these MDN sites that I was showing that dive into cores and same origin policy. I always find it a little confusing to keep track of, and I refer back to them constantly. The good news here is, especially for development, the fix is pretty straightforward. We're going to install a library called Django cores headers. Right? And as it implies here, this lets us set the headers in the responses coming from our Django server for related to cross-origin resource sharing. And I was hoping to maybe go to their README, but that's okay. And we can see here the setup is pretty straightforward. And my virtual environment should be activated. Let me double check real quick. Yep. No, that is definitely the wrong virtual environment. So I was opening tons of different shell sessions here. And now I see what I was expecting, which is we're using the Python in the coming from the virtual environment directory in my project directory for our Django project here. And I'm also just going to quickly make sure I don't have Django running in another spot. Because once you start having multiple terminals open, it can be really easy to get confused. So let's install Django cores headers. And it should be installed. And let's go to settings PY. And we have to do a couple things here. We have to add cores headers to our installed apps. And I'll just put it right here. And we have to add it to this middleware list. And can anyone tell me, we haven't talked a lot about middleware. Can anyone tell me, like, what is middleware? So good, yeah, we haven't talked about this a lot, and now is a perfect time to talk about it. When an HTTP request comes in to Django, right? Like, let's say, get API slash users slash info. We know that the request passes through our view logic, right? And I know that to get there, the request passes through some sort of routing logic, a router, so that it knows where to go. And then the view really calls other code as needed, right? The view might call a model. And then the response gets set back. But for every Django request, before we even get to here, every single request goes through middleware. And the way to think of middleware is a series of tubes. And it's like a request flowing through a series of tubes, like water flowing through a pipe. And in fact, let's use an arrow and let's draw a couple arrows here. And right here is where we define all the different tubes. And this all happens in order. Right, so if I'm looking at the series of tubes that every single Django request runs through, we have the security middleware first. Then we have sessions. Then we have the common middleware. And then we have, what is it, CSRF, which I would have to look up what that is. I don't remember off the top of my head. And then we have authentication, right? And by the way, this is how the authentication token, once you pass it on a request, by the time we get here to our view logic, this is why we can have request.user, because every single request has gone through authentication logic. So I just want to pause and check in here and see if folks have questions, and if this concept is clicking and sort of makes sense. Andy, yes, sir.
When you are importing the authentication, actually that's being imported from Django, right? So it's already included in the middleware before you even import it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. Like all of these different libraries are installed somewhere when we install Django, and then all of this middleware was configured by default. Now, if I commented this line out, then Django would not be using that authentication middleware. just like with the installed apps, like I can install, Django REST framework, but if I don't tell Django to use it, then it won't use it. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, so cores is coming outside of the framework. Is that why we're messing with the middleware now?
Yeah, exactly. The Django cores package is not installed with the default Django package, and it's not set up here in the middleware. So we've installed it, and then, um, and in fact, let me go ahead and add it. And it's not even just about adding it. We also have to add it in a specific spot, and we should put it right before the common middleware.
And that's because you said it goes in order, right?
Exactly. And as it says here, Core's middleware should be placed as high as possible, especially before any middleware that can generate responses, such as Django's common middleware, or I don't know what white noise is. Um, if it's not before, it will not be able to add the core's headers to these responses, right? And this makes sense because if you think about we're telling Django the rules we want it to follow, we want it to follow the core's rules really like all the time for all the requests. And if I put it here, we would never even have our authentication logic working because Django would be rejecting requests for cores reasons. So I want my cores middleware to be fairly early, and we'll put it here and we'll make it like yellow, and let's color it in. And I see a couple questions. Mike, I know you had a question.
It was just going to be about the ordering, but you answered it.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. Um, Carlos, yes, sir.
I'll let Marshall go first.
Okay, go for it, Marshall.
I shouldn't have. No, I was just gonna ask the middleware in documentation it was like course header and not Django.
Oh,
I don't know if that matters.
it probably does. Yep, I totally got that wrong. And in fact, as to your point, Andy, this is telling us what Django modules is coming from. And we can see that these others come from different files or modules that got installed with Django, and this one comes from the course headers package that we just installed. That was totally a typo on my end. So Marshall, thank you so much. Carlos, yes, sir.
So you mentioned that course middleware needs to be up towards the top of that middleware list. Is there a reason why we're not putting it all the way to the top? Like,
You might be
is that
able
other
to.
stuff can it run before course?
Yeah, it's probably a good idea to put it before the session middleware, to be honest, now that I'm looking at this. I don't think it will break anything. It does say as high as possible. So let's move it there. I'm not sure. I don't do a ton with Django sessions. I'm not sure if Django sessions would break without cores there. I would hesitate to put it before the security middleware. And I don't know what the security middleware does, but I'm about 80% certain that it protects against all sorts of common attacks, and maybe things like a denial of service attack where someone tries to like send 1,000 requests per second to your endpoint to shut it down by sending it more it can handle. So my guess is we want the security middleware to like screen everything before we get to cores, but don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure though. And in fact, if we do a quick search, of course, the Django docs do a great job of explaining stuff. And we can see, in fact, here all the different kinds of security enhancements that we can enable or disable. I don't know a ton about each of these different kinds of security, but I feel relatively confident in saying we probably want this one to be first. So that's the one thing that I would say in terms of where to put the cores middleware. Yeah, great question. What other questions do folks have? What else is on people's minds about cores and this cores middleware? Okay, cool. So we're digging a bit deeper, right, into how Django works, into how the HTTP protocol works and the client server architecture works. Let's finish off setting up cores and then we'll take a break. So now that we've added cores middleware, we now have to configure it. We have some options, and I think we can put this anywhere. I'll just put it right after the middleware section. As you can see, we can use regexes. We could also allow all origins. And as the docs describe, these are the origins that will be authorized to make cross-site HTTP requests. And we see an example here of using cores allowed origins. So for instance, I could do that. If I wanted to get fancy with regexes, I could add in regexes to say different origins that I allow. Someone was mentioning a whitelist. That's exactly what we do here. When we deploy to AWS, we will in fact use this, and the sort of best practice for a production environment, for a real world environment, is to have a whitelist and have cores allowed origins be a bit stricter. Unless we're building, say, like a REST API, like if we're building the Pokey API, we want everyone to be able to use this. For development, it's a lot easier just to do this. To set this Boolean cores allow all origins. And this way, you know, if I do something silly and my dev server is running on localhost port 5174 instead of 5173, or for whatever reason the port name or something changes, it just all works. And so for development, this is by far the easier way to do it. And this is what we recommend doing like while you're developing your personal project. So I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions. Okay, cool. Let's see if this works, and then we will take a break. So let me spin up my server again. Server ran, which is always a plus. I don't have any typos. Let's refresh our page and see what happens. And now we get our data message. We see hello world. If I go to the network tab here, just for fun, let's look at the headers. And note this access control allow origin header now has a star after it, which is the regex wildcard for everything. Right. And so now Django is telling the browser, I will accept requests from everywhere. And so the browser then sends our GET request onto the server that sends back this data. All right, why don't we take a break? And then when we come back, we will start building out the front end more. Because we've dug into cores, we've dug into the logic a lot, which is good. We've seen a really simple connection of the front end to the back end. But now we're going to see how we can make Axios a bit fancier, build out our endpoints for sign up, log in, log out, and some of the interesting issues around user flows, and also saving the auth token on the front end, which is really important so a user can stay logged in. So why don't we let me go ahead and pause the recording and then we'll decide how long a break we're going to take. All right, so we covered a lot of ground. We walked through our project layout, which is relatively straightforward. There's a back end and a front end directory. As you can see, I put my virtual environment for my Django project in the top level of the whole project directory. You could put it in the back end directory if you want. It's probably a bit better to put it here, but it's not a huge difference. We spent a lot of time talking about cores, about cross-origin resource sharing, which specifically is the issue that we run into, right? If I have one request to a server originating from a different origin, like we do with our Vite dev server and Django, where because our JavaScript code is loaded from localhost 5173, that's a different origin than localhost 8000, our Django server. So the browser is configured to be strict about CORS rules, and by default, Django rejects requests coming from other origins. And so we installed Django CORS headers. And we had to add it to installed apps, and we had to add it in middleware as well. And then we had to tell Django CORS editors what origins to allow. And in our case, we just want to allow all of them for local development. And we talked a bit about middleware as well, right? That really every single Django request that comes in goes through middleware before it even gets to like the routing and view logic. And so we've now added some CORS middleware to our Django middleware routing. And in fact, let's just put this guy here. And then we got our simple hello world request to our backend up and running. So now we're going to build this out a bit. We're going to get a bit deeper into Axios, and we're going to build logic for logging in, logging out, and also saving the auth token. And I just want to see if folks have questions or anything you want to review or that people are curious about before we keep on rolling. All right, let's do it. So most of this lesson now is going to be in the front end code. And I'm going to go ahead and make a file named api.js, and we're going to import Axios. And we're going to use an Axios method called create instance. Which is super useful. And it lets you set up some default configurations that are applied to this object. And then we can use this for almost anything that we would do with Axios. So I'm going to do Axios create, and we pass in an object as an argument here. And this is where we add our configuration. And our configuration is going to be really simple. We're just going to add the base URL, which is our Django API endpoint. Like that. We're going to come back to the headers later, but for now, this is all we need. And so now over here in app.jsx, rather than importing and using Axios, I'm going to import the Axios instance that I created. and use it here. And I can get rid of all this other stuff because that's all in the base URL configuration. And it looks like I may have a typo.
You have API in the base URL.
Oh, I have API, of course. Thank you. So I outsmarted myself, basically. There we go. And now just to double check, let's clear the console. And we've got that message working. So this is really useful. I strongly encourage you all to use this on your personal projects. And again, the pattern is I create an Axios instance. And then instead of using Axios directly in the rest of my React app, I use this instance. We're going to build on this more and more, as you can see, and it becomes really useful. So I just want to pause and see if folks have questions. Carlos, yes, sir.
And so you can create different ones, right? So you can create an API like that one with a base URL for your 8,000, or I don't know, like your API slash users. You can create another one for API slash list, that kind of thing. Or do you typically want to keep it just like this?
You absolutely could do that. And in fact, let's see here. In addition to using convenience methods, you can also call an Axios instance directly with a get object. Yeah. It's probably easier to create like one base API like this. But then what you could do is like, in fact, we're going to see this in just a minute. This is getting a little ahead, but I won't build this all the way out. And that should be email, not whatever the heck that was. But you're correct. Like if I wanted to, I could build on this. If I was to do that, I might want to do something like this. Like let's grab this and put it here.
So like for our personal projects, we have to implement two different APIs. Then we would just have, API one and then have the base URL, and then API two have the separate base URL, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying with it's different.
I guess
Yes.
I asked a different question initially, but yes.
Yes, exactly. That's a good point. Right. You could do like Pokey API. I thought you were talking about, I see what you're saying. Let's see what the
I think I asked it
API
wrong at
is.
first.
And the idea is eventually we stick in the headers in these API functions. That way we don't have to worry about them later, right? Like the token and everything.
Exactly. And we're going to go there later, but eventually like to do add auth token once user logs in is exactly where we're going with this. And Carlos, as to your point, I can absolutely make an API instance for different APIs. So for instance, I could have here a Pokey API, and then this one maybe I would rename it to like my API or whatever. If you wanted to get fancy, you could even, there's probably a nicer way to do this, but you could do like export const my. I wouldn't recommend this, to be honest. It's probably a bit overkill until you have tons of endpoints. But you could do. I'm pretty sure there's a better way to do this with Axios. But these are a couple different patterns that you can see here that you can do. Mike, yes, sir.
Probably, or I'm pretty sure you're gonna get to it, but how would you implement like an input inside of it? Would you do that in your app.jsx section and leave the APIs untouched?
You mean like getting
Like
information
user
from the
input from,
form?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're going to come to that in just a bit.
Okay, awesome.
But yeah, the sneak preview is sort of right down here, right? If we have like, here's an API endpoint call. And in fact, let's put our Poke API a bit further down. And we'll just say like, you could even have them be in two different files if you really wanted. So let's see, what does this not like?
Line 6, I think there's a comma at the end of it that doesn't need to be there.
Oh, thank you. There we go. So you can start making different functions that use this base API instance. And Mike, as to your point, you can see here, I can pass in arguments that then get used in this case with the post request, where this is the body of our post request coming from these arguments. And then I would use this somewhere else in my React code. And that's what we're going to do in a little bit. Yeah, great questions. Let's go ahead. Let me just use this API call if we haven't. In fact, we already did, which is great. So let's in fact build out that sign up form and to use this register user endpoint that we've got. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do user sign up. Let me go to our page. So we got to do a couple things here, right? We've got to make the sign up form. We've got to put form data in React component state. We will have to make API call to sign up user, and we have to then save the auth token from HTTP response. Right, because remember, the thing with Django and authentication is I can have my client, which in this case is my React app running in the browser, and my server. And the flow's going to look something like this. And my apologies, let's have the first one. And I'm just going to do, I'm not going to put all the API v1 user stuff. And then in the response, we get, token XYZ123. And now every time I want to use the token, like let's say I want to get all of my to-do lists, I also need to pass in my request the token. Otherwise, Django will reject my request. Right? So once I sign up or log in, I get an auth token, and I need to pass that auth token on every single request to Django for these authenticated endpoints to do things like get a list, update a list, delete a list, and so on. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions there. Right, so this is our task. And in this case, we're building it for sign up flow, but we're going to see that it's in a lot of ways, login and sign up are really similar. So I am going to do some copy paste for the sign up form in the interest of time. So just bear with me here. Because if I type it all out manually, it will just take too long and I will also get lost in the sauce. But we know we're going to need some component state for the form fields that we care about here, like email and password. And now I'm going to do some copy paste of a Bootstrap signup form. And let's go to our React app. Let's go to the signup page. Let's make sure there's no errors. Let's make sure that everything's working. If we take a look here, we see this is the really important part here. We have an email address field, and we update the email on change. And we have a password, and we update the password on change. And I'm just using password as my password. And I'm going to use my favorite dev tool, React DevTools. And we're going to look at this form component if we scroll all the way down. Let's actually help a little bit here. Here is our signup component. There we go. And we can see here the React component state indeed has been updated. So my signup front-end component is good to go, though we haven't hooked it up to make an HTTP request or anything like that yet. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions or anything that might be good to review before we hook this up to make the API call. Okay, cool. So we started working on this register user function in API. And let's get the Poke API out of the way. And this is what we're going to build out for when the user signups. So we're going to pass in the email and the password, make a post request, and pass in that email and password in the body of the post request. And then we're going to get the response, and we have to get the auth token from the response and somehow save it. So first, let's make sure that our response succeeded. We should see a 201 HTTP response, meaning success and that something was created. And in the response data should be some user data and hopefully an auth token. And in fact, we can take a quick look at our backend code here. If we go to the user app and we go to views and we go to sign up and we look at the response here for our success case, we see here return response, user, and this is the user display name, and then the token. So the user isn't an object, it's just the display name, and then we get the token back, which is what we really care about. And if I had a little more screen real estate, I usually do a split screen so I can see my backend code and my front end code at the same time. So now we're going to save the auth token in browser local storage. And I'll talk about what this is in just a sec. And local storage is a feature that the browser provides. And in fact, if I go here to, I believe it's under application, we can see there's something called local storage. There's something called session storage that's unique to the browser session. Cookies we'll talk about another day, but the browser provides ways for us to store data. And as mentioned here, we store it as simple key value pairs. So this is the key that we're going to save this in local storage, and this is the value. And in fact, here on the command line, I could do local storage, and this is a JavaScript little program, a JavaScript API for interacting with the browser local storage. And I can put whatever I want in here. I could, in fact, put in like a string of JSON. Might look like this. And if I hop back over now to my application and I look in local storage, and note that local storage is scoped to an origin, we see here, well, it looks like there's a token from, not sure when that's from. That's probably from a long time ago, to be totally honest. So in fact, let's delete that token. And then we see this item that we just put here. And in fact, I can get something from local storage as well. And even if I do a hard refresh, that item is still saved in local storage. So there's some security issues around local storage, but it is a great place to save data. And it's where we're going to put our auth token today. And so just to kind of review local storage, it lets us save key value pairs. It persists even if the browser's closed and reopened, not just refreshing. You can only put a little bit of stuff in there, so you really want it to be text. Though putting JSON in there is a common use case. It follows the same origin policy. I can't use JavaScript to get something saved in local storage from like other JavaScript running from another origin. So if I had this app running on port 5174 and it saved something in local storage, I can't get it. Or if Wikipedia saves something in local storage, I can't get it with JavaScript from my program for security reasons. We have this local storage object in JavaScript that we can use to interact with stuff. This one's important, and this is where the security issues come in. There's no expiration date for local storage. We have to manage it manually. You guys saw that token there. That's probably from like 6 months ago. We don't have to worry about this too much, but this is a synchronous operation. So it could potentially be blocking or slow stuff down. We do want to be mindful of security. Because there's no expiration date on local storage, there are some other options like HTTP only cookies that we'll learn about later that can improve security. And finally, like with everything in the browser, you usually need fallbacks and backups. So I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have questions around local storage and how it works and what we're doing with it here. Carlos, yes, sir.
So you said it, they don't have like an expiration date. Is that by default or you just can't even try and set one on it. Or you would have to do it on your server, right? Like it would still store it, but you can just, I guess, kill that authentication key or
Right.
what?
Yeah. Good question. So local storage is 100% browser based. So like, let's see here. Um, I wonder if Wikipedia stores anything in local storage. No, but Google does. So Google put all this stuff in my local storage. I actually don't know when. Um, and when we're looking in dev tools at browser local storage, there's not even like a created date property here. We can see, like, I was searching for something about Black Sabbath at some point, and Google stuck like a monstrous JSON object in here. I'm not even sure what that is. So, or something, I don't even know what I was searching, something about Intel. I don't remember searching dinosaur eggs, so I'm not sure where it's getting all of this from. But this is local storage is really, really simple. And our software, in this case, our JavaScript codes needs to manage it. So like if I add something to local storage with my React app, I'm responsible for deleting it. I think it's going to just stay there forever. Unlike say cookies, where you can set the server can set an expiration date. Um, local storage does local storage have an expiration? Yep. Data in local storage persists indefinitely until it's removed by the user or the application through JavaScript. So this is a with great power comes great responsibility sort of scenario. Does that help answer your question, Carlos?
It does, thank you.
Yeah, great question. So for us, putting the auth token in local storage means our code is responsible for deleting it when the user logs out, updating it with the new one if needed, really doing everything. For like a production environment, like using a tool like an HTTP cookie might be a bit better. Um, but think about websites where like, you log in and then like the next day or like 6 hours later, if you go to the website, you don't have to log in again, right? Um, Local storage is one way of implementing that behavior. I think you can with cookies too. You have to kind of set an expiration time on cookies. For today, we're teaching you local storage both so you can learn about local storage and because it's relatively straightforward to use. Yeah, great question. Um, and in fact, you can see here there's a bunch of recommendations around how to do stuff with local storage and how to be careful of it. So again, for a production environment, you might want to use HTTP only cookies, and we'll look at that later. Um, but for today, we're seeing both to learn about local storage and for ease of implementation. And as always, MDN has a really good breakdown of stuff. So for this API call that I'm making for Maxios, I'm gonna create a user account. I'm sending an email and password. When it succeeds, I'm going to get the username and the token, and I am then saving the token to local storage. What I'm also going to do is set my Axios API instance to use the auth token. right? So this adds to request headers. So now this is another nice feature of using this Axios instance is once the user registers, now every single request from this Axios API instance will have this set as a header, and it will have the auth token header that it needs, which makes our lives a lot easier. And I'm going to add a quick console log here. And so now we have basically a front end API call function. And we're going to use this same pattern for logging in and signing out and all sorts of other things. And we might as well have this return something just to return stuff. So in here, let's return the username. And if this fails, let's return null. So now let's go ahead and hook this up to our signup endpoint, to our signup page, excuse me. So we have all this signup logic. Let's go ahead and import register user. And this is another nice thing about this pattern is I don't have to import that Axios API instance everywhere, and I can have logic a bit more self-contained. And I believe what we need to do now is update our form on submit. So on submit, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to add a little async function. I'm going to kind of wrap the two function calls I want to make in an array here. First, I want to prevent the default form behavior. And then I want to register my user with the email and password. And let's see if this works. Let's also just add a console log, success, and a username here so we can see it. And so I am going to look at my local storage. There's no token. So the way I will know this has succeeded is I should see a console log message saying success, and then I should see the token in local storage. So let's do adam@codeplatoon.org, and our password is just going to be password. And it looks like we actually got a 500 on the server side. And let's look in our network tab and see what the issue is here.
If you look on your terminal on the left side, it tells you you just didn't put a /.
Yeah. I may go there in a minute. But I'm seeing this is actually kind of nifty. The massive Django error message is in the response as HTML. So you call this URL via post, but the URL doesn't end in a slash, and you have append/set. So Oh yeah, and in fact, we see the same thing here in the Python code where we see the same message. So it looks like I just need to add a slash here, and that might do it. Let's try this again and see if this works. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clear my network requests. Got my username and password. I'm going to clear my console. And now this works. I see success unknown. So maybe on the backend logic, I'm not doing something right with the username. I don't care too much about that right now. If we go to local storage, we now see our token, which is awesome. But let's go ahead, let's fix that error that where I don't seem to be getting the username back. If I look at my backend code real quick and we look at sign up, we see it's grabbing the display name. But I may not have set the display name anywhere, or I may not have passed it in my front end logic. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. I think I'm just going to use the email. Or can someone remind me, does this look like it's going to do what I want it to do if I set display name like this?
I don't think the
Marshall, yes,
display
sir.
name's not being set at all, right? So you
Sorry?
want, like, could you just use username instead? Just set the display name as a username?
Yeah. So I think display name is something we could possibly send in like this, right? But then I want to default back to username if we don't have one. I just can't remember off the top of my head how the Django model handles display name. I suppose we could actually look here. Yeah, so it's a field that we've created. So I think this will do it because what I'm doing here is we never passed in a display name field. So I'm adding a behavior here to my backend code where I'm saying, hey, if we have a display name field in the request data, grab it. Otherwise, default back to whatever the heck the username is. So what I'm going to do, and this is good to show the flow for this too, because you will have to do a lot of deleting of tokens. I'm going to delete the token and let's just have Bob at Code Platoon. And let's create an account for Bob. And now if I look at the console, I see Bob's email here. And we see now Bob has their token in the front end app. And I just want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. Okay, cool. And so now all of my future requests are going to use this token because I've set the Axios API instance to use it, and I've saved it to local storage. Let's also do a bit of extra work so we have this user object that we can grab from different places. Because it would be nice if, say, I could show the username here and we might want to use it in different spots. Carlos, yes, sir.
And I'm more than likely gonna cover through it again, but just so I can dwell on it. So whenever you do your sign out, you would just set your authorization token to just blank, right? Or like, because let's say the user signs out and then somebody else signs that, would it just overwrite the token that's in there?
Right.
Would you want to delete the token on logout?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, let's build that out right now. Which I think is what you're wondering about, and we can circle back to kind of what to do with the username. Let's make a logout user function. And let me just hop over to my guide code here. And this one, like you guys are saying, we're going to be deleting that token. Right? So we have to do a couple things. We have to hit the logout endpoint, and we have to delete token from local storage. So again, we're going to use our API call, and we're going to do post and hit users/logout, and I'll remember my trailing slash. We should get a 204 response. And now, if the logout has succeeded on the Django side, we're going to delete the token from local storage. And we have to delete the token from the Axios API instance. And we'll just return null. Otherwise, we'll do a console log and we'll say logout user, logout failed. And let's go ahead and let's add a log out button somewhere on our nav bar. Oh, and in fact, we have it. So let's hop over to this button in our code and let's hook up this logout function. And I believe it's going to be hiding right here. So let's go ahead and import logout user, and I am going to give myself a little more real estate just to make sure I get my async await logic correct. So this is an async function already, and we have the await here. So we should be able to just call it with an onClick. And let's see if that does it or if I have an issue in my code. So I should be able to tell that logout works because this token will go away. I should see some sort of console message, and I should see the logout request here in the network tab. So it looks like we did get an error. It looks like a 401 unauthorized. Let's see if we can see what's causing that. Authentication credentials were not provided, which is interesting because I thought we had that set correctly, but it looks like maybe there was an error in our Axios API code. So let's look at the headers here on this request from the logout. And if we look at the request headers, I don't see an authentication header. we do have the token in memory. We did set it here. So I wonder what I did wrong. Let's console log out user, API object. Marshall, yes, sir.
This might be a dumb question, but is it because we don't have a login function, and then at the top of your browser, it's you're still on the sign up. Do you need to redirect to like the logout endpoint?
Yeah, good questions. Login, I don't think we need login because when we sign up, we get that auth token, right? And that's the same thing that happens when I log in. Like if we take a look at our Django backend code and we go here to the views and we look at login, really the job of login is to send back a token. So like so sign up in effect also logs the user in, if that makes sense. The front end routing doesn't really matter here. What matters is the API call, right? Remember that we're now using our JavaScript to log out where here, in fact, I'll clear this and hit log out again. Where my JavaScript running in my React app is making this post request to the endpoint. And the problem here is to
Doesn't look
log
like the
out.
token got passed, right?
Sorry?
It doesn't look like the authorization and token header got passed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. For some reason, the authorization header is not getting passed. And this is actually a good example of how to debug these sorts of full stack issues. And this is why the network tab becomes your best friend. So this tells me that the problem is almost definitely in my front end code, in my registration logic, that something is not right with this line right here, because I should be seeing authorization token and the token name in this request header. So I did add this console log statement. Let's actually console log, let's see, api.defaults.headers common. So let's console log this right here, defaults.headers.common. And we know we're not going to see it, but I want some better debugging data. And we're definitely not seeing it. So I wonder if I did a page refresh or something at some point that caused an issue. Because the token's here in local storage. So let's try signing up again as someone new. Let's try signing up as Carol. So we see success, we see register user. We see the token here in local storage. Let's see if logging out works. And now logging out works. So this points to one of the tricky bits of using local storage and any sort of caching. Just because the token is in local storage doesn't mean my JavaScript app is using it. What must have happened is, as I was writing my front end code, the dev server did some hot reloading. And so my React app restarted and the running JavaScript program no longer had that auth token, right? Because here we see the logout succeeded. We see it's here in the API headers. And if I go to the network tab here and I look at this logout request, and we look at the request headers, we see the auth token right there. Andy, yes, sir.
So was the issue that the user wasn't logged in due to the refresh?
Yes, though we haven't even implemented logging in on the front end logic.
Okay.
I would say like we're not even at the point where login exists. The issue was that my logout HTTP request did not have an auth token in the request header. Right? And let's go ahead, let's implement a little more code here and talk about it. But just remember, if I go back to my diagrams, all that login does, sign up and login, sign up creates an account and returns this token, right? Login uses a password to validate for an existing account and returns this token to the front end. If I want to log out, my request needs to have this token because this is how the server knows that this is a valid request. So in essence, Andy, you're correct. Like the user wasn't logged in, but it's not because we didn't hit the login endpoint. It's because from Django's perspective, the only way it knows a user is logged in is when this token is in the request headers of an HTTP request. Does that help answer your question a bit?
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Good question. And there is a lot of stuff going on here. So let me build this out a bit more. And then when we have a bit more working examples in the code, I think it'll be easier to see. The first thing I want to build out is because part of the issue here is like my React application state changed while I was working on code and we didn't see it. So let's build this out a bit more so we can see what's going on. If I go to app.jsx, we have some state here sitting here for holding like our username and it's just sort of sitting around. And, we're not doing anything with it yet. Let's add another use effect here. Let's just have it console log and we'll just say app username user. What I really want to do here is in the outlet, pass in some outlet context. And I want to pass in user and set user. And the reason I want to do that is when someone signs up, I want to be able to set the user. So, and let me do a bit of a split here so we can see what's going on. And I need to do a little bit of work here. Let's import use outlet context. And let's use it. And if I hop over here to my API and we go to this register user function, down here, we see I'm returning the username when the user successfully registers. And so over here in the form, I'm setting the user. And we're setting this bit of component state up here in the app. And let's do something interesting with this. Let's pass the username as a prop into the navbar. And let's add some code to show the username when they're logged in. And let's have it look something like we've got the sign up link, we've got login, we've got log out. Why don't we do something like this? If there is a user, let's show the username and we'll show log out. If there isn't a user, in fact, let's modify this a bit. My apologies. We're going to show username log out, but we're not even going to show this button if the user isn't logged in. So this is a little hacky, but I now have a ternary that's going to look at this bit of component state that's our username. And when I'm logged in, this will be set and we can see the logout button. And when I'm not logged in, we won't see the logout button. And let's see if this works. And we can play around with this and stuff. And we can close this out. We can close this out. Looks like I have an error. Cannot destructure property set user. So it looks like maybe in over here, I made a bit of a mistake. This should return the context object as it is undefined. Maybe I have a mistake in app.jss. No, I have those. I suspect I may just have something silly going on here in my code. Let's see if interesting. So I apologize. I might have an issue here in my outlet context. Um, though I think most of this should be set up. Let's take a break, both because I think I need 5 minutes to debug this offline, and catch my breath, and also so we can take a break, and then we can finish this off. We're actually pretty close here. We've seen about like 50 to 60% of what we want to look at. One, we're going to see that log in and log out are pretty straightforward, but then we're going to see some interesting stuff here with grabbing the auth token from local storage when the user refreshes the page and stuff like that. So let's take 5, and then when we reconvene, we'll pick this up, and I should hopefully have it debugged. All right. So we got a little lost in the sauce there. I was running into I had a syntax error in my code that was breaking stuff. And then just a bunch of behavior was occurring that we didn't want. So let's just kind of like review and recap here a bit. If we look at our API logic, we have code here to register a user, right? And this does a couple things. The big thing is it saves the token to local storage and it adds it to the common headers. It also returns the username. And we've added an API function to log out a user. And this makes a post request. It removes the token from local storage, and it also deletes it from the default API headers. I'm also taking advantage of this return user right here from user registration. And at the top level of our app, we have user and set user, and I want to get my username and be able to share it throughout the whole app. And my issue, by the way, was I was missing a closing parentheses in the use effect, and it was causing a whole bunch of stuff to break. So because this user and set user component state is at the top level, I can pass the username into the nav bar, and then I can pass both user and set user into outlet context. And that means that here on the signup page, I can grab set user from outlet context. And when we call this sign up or this registration endpoint, when it succeeds, it returns the username, and we set it here to the component state. So let me go ahead and put us in a clean state so we can see this work. Let's do a hard page refresh. And let's just have frank@gmail.com. And we should see several things happen here. We should see some happy console log messages. We should see the token added to our application state, and we should see this successful network request. So we see here our user registered successfully. And we see here the token has been added to the application. And we see in this sign up endpoint that we hit, the token is in the response. Somewhere I'm console logging some Axios headers. We'll see it when we log out. I added a little bit of extra code during the break. If we look at our nav bar, I'm grabbing that user from component state that I'm passing it in through the app. And right here, I'm just showing a little message that says, hey, if a user exists, let's show their name. Also, if a user exists, let's show the logout button. And so now if I go ahead and I hit the logout button, a couple of things happen. Mike, yes, sir.
Since you have that, if the user exists, show their name, else empty string, would that empty string cause like formatting issues for like a styling?
No,
Like it won't take up space, basically, is what I'm asking.
it doesn't take up space. It's in effect the same thing as null.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Good thought. You could use null here. Since this is a string, I wanted this to be a string for consistency. And then we have this bit here as well. But yeah, empty string will in effect be the same as null. And actually, let me pause and see if folks have other questions or stuff you're curious about as well. Cool. Okay. So let's look at log out, which is now working. I'm not sure where my issue was before, but I have added a nice helpful debugging console log where we're console logging from that Axios API object that I create, the default common headers. And we see here that it's a little hard to see, but there's authorization token is indeed there on the headers. We didn't see that error message. And if we go to the network tab, and again, the network tab is really your best friend, especially when you're working with full stack apps. And we look at the request here, we see the request URL, we see it succeeded. And if we look at the request headers, we see that authorization token header. And that's what was missing before. And Andy, as to your question, like this is why Django was rejecting the logout request, right? Because Django sees that request and it's like, hey, you're not authorized. From my perspective, you're not logged in. And this is where it gets a little funny, and like people refer to HTTP as a stateless protocol, and this is why. Django has an auth token saved, but it doesn't really know if someone's logged in, so to speak, or not. It needs this on the request to know that, right? And then it can check to make sure this token's valid, but this is why we need this auth token passed on every request. So now our logout works. Yes, Andy.
So at one point you did the use state for when the user's logged in,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna see the log out button. How come that worked if you were not logged in?
How come which worked?
How come it worked? Like if how come the condition passed if for the use state of login if you were not logged in?
Oh, because you mean like why am I able to see the username here and stuff?
Yeah, before the whole logout function
Right,
worked.
right. If I'm understanding your question correctly, it's because when we register, this also Django creates a token, and that in effect logs the user in. Right. And in fact, let's take a quick look at the Django view logic. And this touches on a good point. So sign up does two things. It creates a new user and we log the user in. And we do that for a good user experience, right? It's nice that if you sign up to somewhere, you can be logged in right away. So I don't have to sign up and then also enter my username and password again. And so these two lines right here are where Django checks the username and password are correct. And if they're correct, then it creates an auth token and sends the auth token back to the client, to the browser. And so we have that happening on sign up. And we're about to implement login on the front end, but we're going to see it does something really similar, where again, we grab the username and password and we check that they're correct. And if they are, we log the user in and we create an auth token and we send it back. So Django is storing an auth token when a user logs in, but remember the way we configured our Django logic is that you need to pass the auth token on every request. And that's how Django protects logged in endpoints and know who the logged in user is and stuff. And it's like the difference of if you get a letter in the mail, it's like getting a phone call from someone in your address book versus a phone call from an unknown number. Sort of. I think, or a better analogy actually might be you get a letter in the mail and it has a return address, and you get a letter in the mail that doesn't have a return address. The return address at least like tells you who it's from, right? And so I need to pass that token on every request to an authenticated endpoint in order to do anything, right? For instance, here for our client, let's say before we log out, let's just put all this. Let's say I want to make a new list, right? And so it might look like this, and it might be like name, grocery list. It doesn't matter that I've logged in if that HTTP request doesn't include the auth token in the request header. Django will reject it, right? Because if we hop to our list app view, we've set token authorization on this list. And remember, Django has all this middleware, and this authentication layer is where it looks for the token in the HTTP request and figures out, okay, this is the user associated with that token. This user exists, and like these are their lists, or they have permission to create a list. Or, if I wanted to say, instead of post, maybe I was getting a list of ID 3, Django would check to make sure that indeed that list is owned by that user. And I just want to see if that helps, like, to illustrate the importance of like passing the auth token on every request. And some of this will come with practice as well. I think, did someone else have a question? I thought I saw a hand up there.
I did, but then I realized it's more of a design decision.
Okay, cool. Let's go ahead. Let's implement logout. Let's also set it up, like right now I logged out, but I haven't cleared the user. Let's go ahead and clear the user as well. If I go to the nav bar here and we have this logout user, let's change this very slightly. And really, we're just going to do two things. We're going to log out the user, and we're going to set user to an empty string. And I actually have to pass in set user from app.jsx. So let's go ahead and do that as well. And remember, this is just the username. It could have more information, but that's all it is right now. And let me go ahead and refresh this, and we'll see this behavior later. Let's go ahead, let's implement login, right? A note, by the way, I did in the nav bar add a little bit of logic. So it's looking for this username. And if we don't see it, we don't display a logout button, which is kind of nice, right? Because if I haven't logged in, I shouldn't see the logout button. It should just be sign up and log in. So let's implement our login logic. And it's going to be very similar to this registration logic. And it's going to be an async function. And we're going to need an email and a password. This time for a user that already exists. And we're going to hit that login endpoint, and we're going to pass the email and the password in the body of the request. And we're going to check to make sure that we succeeded. And if so, we're going to grab the username and the token from the response data. We're going to set the token in local storage, just like we did before. And if I wanted to, I could totally refactor some of these functions to have more shared logic. But I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. And again, I'm going to set a header, a default header for all of my HTTP requests that I make using this Axios instance to always pass the token. And let's return the username as well. And if something went wrong, let's just put a login user error message here and return null. And so now, if I go to my nav bar, we have this login button. And let's go ahead and add some similar logic like we did here for logging out. Oh, my apologies. I totally forgot. We probably need a login page since the user has to enter their name and email. And in fact, we have a login page. So we need a form here. And I am going to do some copying and pasting here in the interest of time. So I'm just going to paste most of our dependencies that we're going to need. And let me get this name right as I changed it a bit. And we're going to need some component state to store the username and the email. And we need to also grab this set user to set the username for a whole app from outlet context. And now I'm going to do some copying and pasting for the form, and we'll walk through it in just a sec to see its behavior. And so we've got a form. We've got on submit here that's making an async call. We see prevent default. We see here we're using our login user function and passing the email and the password. When this succeeds, we'll get a username back, and we're setting it here, so that'll be set globally. And we see here a controlled component for email and a controlled component for password. We probably could, again, refactor this so that sign up and login share some code, but we can worry about that later. And as a quick sanity check, I'm going to look in component DevTools. And we see indeed here that the username and password are correct. And I want to double check to make sure that I don't have a token, that indeed it was deleted. So a couple of things should happen when I hit submit. We'll make the HTTP request to Django to log in. It should succeed. I should see a token here. I should see some happy console log messages. I should see my username show up here. And then I should see the logout button show up as well. And it looks like we got an error, which is interesting because it looks like we got the token. So I may have something wrong in my front end code. So let's look at the network tab, because now the way to debug this is we want to figure out, is the problem in my front end code or on the back end? And the network tab lets me look at the messages passed back and forth to help identify where the problem is. So if I look at this login, it looks like it succeeded. User unknown, token, blah, 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 blah. So this tells me clearly the issue's on my front end. And in fact, I would have thought that we wouldn't have seen an error. So let's go look at our login logic. We have return user, but we still saw this login error. So I'm a little surprised because most of this seemed to work. The token did not get saved. So this line, if response 201, this part did not happen. So
What was your response
yeah,
status?
that was my next thought. I
200.
screwed up. Yep. For login, it looks like it's giving me a 200 response and not a 201 response. Right. So this is actually a great example of debugging because this is an easy mistake to make. Right. And this is why the network tab is important because it helps me isolate stuff. So my server was good to go. This part was good to go, but then this part was wrong. So this needs to become a 200. Let's in fact do this for Carol or someone who has a username because I think I changed it later. Um, no token was saved, so I don't have to delete it. So I'm just going to clear my console and my network tab so I have good data when I run this. And now this worked because now I see Carol's here. Right? We knew that the login was working. I see the token is here. I see the console with my print statement. And I see the logout button. And in fact, let's log Carol out just to see this flow. And let's clear the network tab. And so now if I hit log out, we see Carol's gone. We see that token is cleared. And if we look, we'll see that logout request, which indeed has the authorization header. So let me just pause there and see if folks have any questions about stuff. And how are we feeling about this flow of like logging in, logging out, grabbing the auth token? We feeling pretty good? Cool. It gets surprisingly tricky, right? You just all we have is a client and a server, but it gets surprisingly tricky. A client server architecture is still a distributed application. So we can do a couple things here. Like if I go to the nav bar, it might be nice. I don't think I should show the login button if the user's logged in. In fact, we can refactor this a little. Like, let's say, if there's no user, then let's show sign up, let's show login. But if the user is logged in, let's not show those things. And I feel like it did not like the way I wrote this. So let's try. No, it does not like that at all. So this is a little hacky. We're going to do this the lazy way. There's undoubtedly a cleaner way to do it. Because this is a lot of duplicate logic, right? It's a little silly to have like 3 ternaries doing the same thing. But in the interest of time, that was quick. It was simple. I got it working. And what I should see now is when Carol logs in, we see sign up and login go away and we just see log out. And indeed, we see that working. Right. So again, this points to like once you get that state, you can do a lot of really nice stuff with it. But what if I refresh the page? Well, this isn't great. I logged in as Carol. My token is still here. I've still got the token in local storage, but the React app doesn't know the token exists, right? Because it hasn't grabbed it. And because I refreshed the page, the whole React app restarted. And this was how I got confused earlier. So what would be really nice is when the app loads for the first time, because it's not just about page refreshes, right? It's also about when I, close the tab and come back to it later. It would be nice to check if that auth token is there. So I want my app to look in local storage for the auth token every time it loads. So let's go ahead and implement that. And let me give myself a little bit of real estate here. And we're going to call it user confirmation. Check if auth token exists. Client side already, so in local storage. And this is going to be an async function. And this one's going to be a little different. We're going to check local storage for our token. And if there's a token, we're going to do all the things we like to do with it. We're going to do API, defaults, headers, common, authorization. Token. So that's a good start. Right now, all my future API requests will have the auth header and be logged in essence. But I still want my username. And there might be like, if I have like, a favorite list or starred Pokemon, there might be all sorts of data, like user profile data or default data that we want to grab. So I need to talk to the server. I need to get user basic user info and the default user data we want to display. And we're just going to hit the user's endpoint. Let me make sure this is the right endpoint. Let's go into our backend app and look at the URLs. And we just see this is indeed our info endpoint, right? And if we take a look at that info class, we see that if we're making, and it doesn't look like we have a GET request. So I think we might need to add a little bit of code here. I think we just need to return the user. So let's do return response user. And I think we can just do request.user.displayname, right? Because the user is already logged in here. So the request object should have a user on it. Does that sound right to folks? Just to get a quick sanity check. I'm seeing a couple nods, right? I remember that's that middleware doing the work for us because we have this token rec here. We're forcing authentication. So now I should be able to get user information. And now if I hop back here, this should indeed give me some user data. And let's just check the response. This should be a 200. And let's return response data user. And what we'll do here is we'll console log and we'll say user confirmation, returned response other than 200. And over here, we'll say user response error. Right? Not user confirmation error. In fact, there is no response. So it'll just look like that. And so now that I've got this, I want to use this all the time. But it would be really nice if this could be the first thing that happened. If I use a use effect, then app renders and then this happens, and I have to add all this if else statement and stuff. So we're gonna use another approach here. We didn't talk about it that much, but React Router has something called a loader. And if we look it up real quick, we can see, let's see, where is the part that I want to show here? Let's try React Router loader. Here we go. So a loader is a function that provides data to a route element before it renders. So by doing this, we should be calling this function and doing this work before the app element renders. So fingers crossed, if we hop back over here, and let's see if we have anyone logged in at the moment or not. Let's go to our application. It looks like there is someone logged in. So let's refresh our page and see if this works. And it did not look like it worked. Input elements. This, let's see if this is a case of dev server. No, this one, it doesn't look like user confirmation is running at all. If we go to our API, in fact, let's add a couple console logs here. Right. So actually, I was wrong here. It is working. We are getting the token. It just looks like at this point, let's see, are we making the API call? And we in fact are making the API call. Oh, this is the best kind of problem to have. I just totally forgot to do anything with my data once I get it back. So this is the beauty of debugging, right? It turns out we did everything right. We just forgot the next step here. And it does appear that the loader is working. And now that the loader is working, we need to actually use the data that it gives us. And of course, there's a hook for that. Use loader data. So we are going to go ahead and here in our use state, we are going to call use loader data. And this will set user state defaults to come from our user confirmation logic that checks for existing token and gets user data. And now we see Carol pop up here, right? And now, you know, I can close this tab. I can open a new one. I'm making my API call. In fact, if we look at the network tab here and we do a hard refresh, We see right here the call to get our user data. And now if I log out, my user's logged out. Right. And now if I refresh, let's see, you defined a loader for route 0, but didn't return anything from your loader function. Please return a value or null. So I clearly made a mistake here. Luckily, this is a very straightforward fix. We simply need to return null when we don't get any user data, which makes perfect sense. And so now we do have this logic working, and we can use the token in our local storage to grab our user data. So there's a little bit more to show here to add on to this, but this is really the meat of it and kind of, everything else building up to this. So I want to pause and check in and see what questions folks have or what people are curious about. Andy, yes, sir.
Um, what's the relationship between the loaded data and user confirmation?
Yeah, great question. Let me pull them both up here. So we've got user confirmation, and the job of this function is to check local storage, see if there's a token. If there is, we add it to our Axios API object, and then make a request to get our default user info, like say our user profile data from Django, right? So this request will have the auth token, will in effect be logged in. And then it returns that user data. So the job of user confirmation is to check if the token is in local storage, and if it is, fetch our user data from our API from Django. The job of the loader, and let me go to the routing file here, is a React router loader says, I will not render this element until this function has executed. So React router will execute this function for us. And because we put it on our parent app, it'll do it really for every page, right? Because it's the parent of everything else, and it calls this function. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the bit I forgot, which is we need to use the use loader data hook so that app can grab the data that was loaded, which in this case is just a username. Really, it would be, like a JSON object with a bit more user data probably. And if it got more complex, we might need to do a bit more than this. But since really all this does right now is hold a username, we can just do it this way. And so then this way, every time our app component renders, that use confirmation is called first from the React router loader. If it gets anything, it's put in here. Yeah, great question. Does that help break it down?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys can see how it's like, all the individual pieces are relatively straightforward. The complexities and how they all add up. And I think the big one is remembering that HTTP is, they call it a stateless protocol, where Django only knows really what's in the HTTP request. And the auth token is like sort of the key that needs to be on every request that Django can use to see, hey, is there a user account for this person? Like, can I authenticate or not? And the job of signing up and logging in really is to get that auth token. What other questions do folks have, or what else is on people's minds? Okay, awesome. I think there's maybe one other thing I want to show. If I go to the app and I log in, and let's log in as Carol. So I'm logged in as Carol. I can go to a home page. Sorry that all that stuff is popping up.
I think it's because you used Gmail and not her not the code platoon email.
Oh, let's see here. So the tricky part is checking. Okay, so there's no token. So let's log in. I thought Carol was Carol at Gmail. Let's see. Yeah, it's also when you're making fake data, just keep it simple, right? So yeah, good call. Thank you. I was totally skeptical, but you were bang on. So Carol's logged in. There's not a lot of interesting places for Carol to go right now. There's a home page, but there's not a lot there. There's a logout page. In terms of navigation, I've hidden the sign up and the login pages. If we look at our front end routing real quick, right? I've hidden sign up and login. But if I typed these in, then because we're not clicking on a link to get there, React Router still takes us there, right? And this is a less than optimal user experience. Like if we're grabbing a user's information and they have their token, I just want to take them straight to their homepage. And let me, in fact, add a little bit of data on the homepage just so we have a bit more to see here. Let's grab use outlet context and let's make this, let's add a fragment and let's put the homepage there and we'll just say H2 and we'll say user use outlet context. User's homepage. Right, I just wanted a little bit more so that we can see where we are as we navigate around the app. So what I want is if someone's logged in and this URL is entered manually, right? If I copy and paste or whatever, I want my React app to just redirect this user to the homepage. So there's a couple ways to implement this, but one relatively straightforward way is we're going to add a use effect in app.jsx. And this will redirect logged in user to homepage from login and sign up. And you can also use this pattern to control what pages a logged in user or a not logged in user can or cannot view, right? So you could use this same pattern in a slightly different way for someone who's not logged in if they're trying to like look at the to-do list to redirect them to the sign up page. And we need to write a little bit of manual routing logic in essence. And there's probably a nicer way to do this in React Router. I'm just not sure of it off the top of my head. But we're going to make a list of the URLs we don't want people to look at. We're going to check if they're on an allowed URL or not. And if they're logged in and it's on is allowed, we'll just let me import from React Router the navigate hook. And let's just use it right here. We'll navigate them to the home page. And let's go ahead and let's add something to the dependency right here. So let's watch the user and let's watch the URL bar. And let's see if this works. And so now we see, I thought we had that working. It seems to work for sign up. Ah, the issue seems to be the trailing slash. So we might have to, there's definitely a nicer way to do this, maybe with a bit more regex. But you can see here that we can then redirect this user to the home page. We could also use this logic to disallow unlogged in users from certain pages if we wanted. And I think I must have yeah, I think there's a typo in this part, so I'm gonna pull this part out and I'll maybe add it back in later. Because I think the goal would be to basically say, hey, if you're not logged in and it's not one of these pages, send you back to them. So if you're not logged in and you're looking at any page except, let's call these like allowed logged out pages. Then navigate to sign up. And so now if I'm not logged in and I try to go somewhere, yeah, I apologize. I think I have this part wrong. I had the part working for logged in, but this other part isn't quite working. So let me just pause there because I think I'm getting a little lost in the sauce. And we can also see now that like I've added this to the home page. There's a little bit of work to be done there. So I apologize. I think this part I'm going to leave out. We do have it in the curriculum. I think my brain is just looking at the code wrong at this point. So that's a little bit of an icing on the cake. The big one is really the user confirmation and the loader, right? And So just to kind of recap, and then we can wrap up, as I know I ran a bit long here. Um, we've seen how to lay out a project. We've dug pretty deep into cores. We've seen a lot of Axios API logic for signing up, logging in, logging out, saving the auth token, and then some user flows for if a user is logged in or not, and for handling page refreshes and stuff. So as you all go into your personal projects, I do strongly recommend using this pattern that you see here. This part alone will save you time and effort. And then building out your logic for registering a user, logging in a user, and basically writing little functions for each of your API calls here makes life a lot easier. So I do recommend embracing this addition to sort of your front end API call logic. And I just want to see if folks have any questions before we wrap up. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.